Today, we're diving into the pretty chaotic world of 16th century England to talk about a theologian named Richard Hooker. And trust me, his ideas about reason, tradition, and faith didn't just shape a church, they ended up influencing Western thought for centuries.
So, let's start with a huge question. How do you stop a religion from literally tearing itself apart? I mean, this was the absolute burning question of Hooker's time. The Church of England was stuck in this vicious tug-of-war, with different sides threatening to just shatter the whole thing. How could anyone possibly find a path forward?
Okay, to really get Hooker, you have to understand the crisis he was staring down. After breaking away from Rome, the Church of England was basically having a massive identity crisis. The pressure was just immense. You had people who wanted to go back to the old Catholic ways. And then you had this new, fiery movement that wanted to purify the church of all that stuff completely.
And this slide just lays out the conflict so clearly. On one side, you've got the Puritans. Their argument was pretty simple. If it's not explicitly in the Bible, get rid of it, period. But on the other side, the established church was defending its traditions, its ceremonies, its whole structure with bishops. It was a total clash of absolutes, and there was really no middle ground in sight. And right in the middle of this firestorm, you have this one guy, Richard Hooker. He was a priest, a theologian, and he saw just how dangerous this extremism was. He looked at all of it and thought, there has to be another way. A more thoughtful, more stable path that doesn't involve destroying the church just to save it.
And finding that path, well, that became his life's work. Hooker came up with something known as the Via Media, and this idea would become the intellectual cornerstone of the entire Anglican Church. So, Via Media is just Latin for the middle way. But don't let that fool you. This was not some lazy compromise. Not at all. It was this really sophisticated, deep argument for a balanced church, one that could navigate between the super rigid authority of Rome and the equally radical demands of the Puritans. It was all about carving out a space for a faith that was uniquely English.
And this quote right here, this gets to the absolute heart of it. Hooker's big idea was that God gave us brains for a reason. Faith wasn't about switching off your intellect. No, it was about using that God-given ability to reason to better understand God's law and the world you live in.
So how did he actually structure this? Well, Hooker laid out this brilliant and, as it turns out, incredibly durable framework for authority. He argued that it shouldn't rest on just one leg, but on three really sturdy pillars.
And this just illustrates his thinking perfectly. So pillar number one is Scripture. Of course, that's the foundation, the bedrock. But, and this is the key, it wasn't the only source of authority. Pillar two was tradition. All the collected wisdom of the church passed down for generations. And finally, pillar three was reason, our ability to think logically and figure things out. For Hooker, these three weren't in conflict. They were a team, working together in harmony. Let's be really clear here. This was a huge deal back then. In an age of intense religious dogmatism, Hooker was making this powerful case for using your mind as part of your faith. He was arguing that things like rituals or how the church was run could be totally fine even if they weren't in the Bible, just as long as they didn't contradict it and were backed up by tradition and sound reason.
Hooker's ideas didn't just fix the problem in front of him, they echoed through the centuries, and they created this profound, lasting legacy. So let's take a look at how.
Well, for starters, his major work became the defining text for Anglicanism. It gave the church its theological identity. It also provided a really solid defense for the church's structure and all its practices. But his influence went even further. It helped shape English political ideas about law and government. And he ended up being this crucial link between medieval thought and the beginning of the modern era. So look, if you take just one thing away from this, it should be this. Richard Hooker's genius was that he brought things together. He totally refused to accept that you had to choose between scripture and reason, or faith and tradition. Instead, he built a tent big enough for all of them, and in doing so, created a vision for the church that was both balanced and incredibly resilient.
And that leaves us with one last question, doesn't it? Hooker's challenge was finding a middle way through the extremism of his day. Now, more than 400 years later, in a world that often feels defined by rigid, opposing sides, his search for a balanced path, one guided by reason, wisdom, and core principles, feels more relevant than ever. So it makes you wonder, where do we find our Via Media